Welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this talk by Sean Smith. Sean's a longtime colleague and also author of several of Persana's surveys. They're his surveys, which we distribute, and customer experience, organizational alignment, employee engagement. I've been fortunate to know Sean since about the early 90s, if you can believe that. He's launched his career in the private sector. Before that, he was working for British Airways and was eventually head of customer service and marketing and sales. I had the fortune, after he decided to work for a company, or work with, I should say, a company in Hong Kong. I was a partner of Persana at the time, called Performa. Hold on. Let me admit these people. Company called okay. They're all admitted. Company called Performa, and we've been colleagues ever since that time. And I've had the privilege of watching Sean's career. Sean's a very focused guy. Somebody else admitting these people? Somebody else must be admitting these people.
Yes, John, I'm admitted, so don't worry.
All right. Okay, great. Yeah, so I've been very, what should I say, very lucky to watch Sean in his career, where he's been focused on customer experience, having created, I've watched the path of his progress through several co-authored books that he's written called Uncommon Practices to start with, and then Customer Experience Management, and his latest book is called Bold, where he's actually gone through a transition from the traditional customer service philosophy to one where he's looking at customer and been researching and helping many companies with customer experience, which is quite different in terms of its helping to create a branded experience for companies, and that branded, differentiated experience has resulted in a greater customer loyalty for those companies. And of course, if some of you know the Harvard Business Service model, it follows closely this model, and also results in revenue generation. So it's been an exciting journey to watch Sean. He's worked in a variety of industries, from hospitality to obviously airlines, to banking, to hospitality. So he's had a very broad range of experiences with well-branded and known companies such as Ferrari and Westin Hotels, Shangri-La Hotels, Intercontinental, Leo Burnett, First Direct Bank, and one you're going to hear about some today called Burberry. So I'm very pleased to have Sean be having this talk for us on how to win in a post-COVID world. And we are definitely, hopefully, very shortly in a post-COVID world. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean. One thing I want to tell everybody is that if you have questions, Sean's talk is going to be about 45 minutes. If you have questions, please use the chat below, where you can put your questions. We'll try to get to them at the end of the talk here. He'll speak for about 45 minutes, and then he will take questions through chat. And if we can't get through all the questions, we're certainly get to answer them later, maybe directly by email. So I'm very, very pleased to have Sean, who I'm going to make right this very second. I'm going to make him co-host. Okay. And you should be pretty much ready to go.
Okay, thanks so much indeed for your kind comments, John. That's great. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. But thank you for sharing some time with me. So if we think back over the last 15 years or so, pre-COVID, most markets and most economies have been booming. The tide has been rising, as we say. And when you have those kind of conditions, when you have a rising tide, many companies float with the tide to the top. It's easy to be successful when you've got a booming and growing economy. But the problem is that when you have a crisis, when you have some kind of issue like the financial crisis in 2008 or the recent COVID crisis, then no longer is the tide rising. And what you have is a situation where only the best companies survive. So let me presentation. I know that many of you are Persona Global partners. I know that a number of clients are also on the call from all over the world. And I guess the question that all of us are struggling with, whether we're consultants or whether we're customers, is how to win in this post-COVID world. So what I'd like to do in this 45 minutes is to share with you some thoughts from research to show how you might win. So let's start by looking at a major piece of research, which is conducted by WPP Cantor, which is one of the largest research companies in the world. And they've been conducting this study called Brand Z for the last 14 years. It's a huge study. It's 3.8 million consumers around the world. It's with 18,000 brands in 51 markets, so a huge study. And basically what they do is to track all of these brands over this 14 years to see their valuations and their performance. And the orange color you can see at the top of this graph are what they call the top 100 most valuable brands. So right at the top of that list are brands like Apple and Amazon, but many other leading brands that you would recognize. Those are the ones in the orange, and they outperform the market, as you can see, by 285%. And the next blue brand are also the Brand Z companies, but they're below the 100, the top 100. And then we get into the yellow area, which is the S&P 500, so the general market index, and finally the world index, which is the brown color. And as you can see, the top 100 most valuable brands have outperformed the market significantly. But the interesting thing is this: if we look at the green circle, this is in 2008 when the financial crisis hit most markets. And as you can see, all of the brands dipped down and declined during that period. But if you look at the orange ones, they recovered much faster. Now, let's look at most recently with COVID. And once again, if you look at the green circle, you can see that in sort of March, April last year, most brands plummeted in terms of the valuation, in terms of their revenues and their incomes. But if you look at the orange ones, see how quickly they started recovering. And that's the issue, that when you're a strong brand, when you are one of these winners, you recover very fast, even in a crisis. And the question is, why is that? And how does that happen? Well, interestingly enough, Andrew Grove, the CEO or former CEO of Intel, once said that bad companies are destroyed by crisis, good companies survive them, but great companies are improved by them. And Andy Milligan, my co-author, and I certainly have found that in our research with leading organizations, that when you're a great brand, you accelerate out of these crises and you become even stronger. And of course, that's what we would all like to help our clients do. And if those of you who are clients, that's certainly what you'll be wanting to do. But the question is, how do you do that? So I'm going to ask you a question, and John, and perhaps I could ask you to launch the poll. So where do you think brands that win mainly focus? Do they focus, first of all, on A, profits and shareholder returns, the numbers, B, on customer satisfaction, or C, on employee satisfaction? I will imagine that you've had the opportunity of answering that question, and you can think for yourselves what your response would be. The fact is that many organizations, not all of them, but many of them, really focus on their numbers, their quarterly earnings, their profits, their shareholder returns. Whereas in fact, the research done by Andy Milligan and myself with leading brands has found that the brands that win, first and foremost, focus on really creating customer satisfaction. Because if you do that, then shareholder returns will follow. And this is borne out by the Brand Z study that I mentioned earlier, with 3.8 million consumers in 51 markets. They looked at these top 100 valuable brands, and they compared their focus on customer experience with the lesser performing brands. And what they found was that those brands that have focus on the brand experience grow 5 times faster than those that have a lower focus on the customer experience. So huge difference in terms of growth there around customer focus. And the fact is that brands that win need to do 3 things, and I'm going to cover each of them briefly on this call, and we'll focus around one of them. So the first is that brands that win focus, first of all, on their purpose. Why do they exist? What is the value that they create for their customers? So knowing your purpose is very important. And we've seen that particularly through COVID-19, where I'm sure in your markets too, certainly we've seen it in the UK, consumers are increasingly wanting to do business with brands that have been helpful to them in this crisis. And the brands that have been self-serving, those brands that have made life difficult or focused on making profits, have become much less popular. So knowing why you exist is very important. The second thing is making it personalized. So focusing on customers and their needs. So knowing why you exist and then being able to focus on your customer is very important. And then thirdly, being very agile, so moving with pace. And to do that, you need to engage your employees. Because if your employees are engaged, they're able to, they're motivated, they're productive, and they're able to work very quickly to help you pivot. And I'll say more about that later. So 3 things. And these 3 things really came from the research that Andy Milligan and I did for our most recent book. So sorry, John, but we're a book ahead of you now. Our most recent book is called On Purpose, Delivering a Branded Customer Experience That People Love. And we researched brands like Apple and Amazon and many of the leading brands. And what we found is that when you look at these really strong brands, they really first and foremost understand their purpose, they focus on their customers, and they focus on their people. And when we look at purpose, we found that there are 3 types of purpose. The first is brand purpose. So why does your brand exist? And that's primarily because of the value that you create for your customers. The second type of purpose is the commercial purpose. So that's making profits, it's making money for your shareholders, it's pleasing the stockholders. And the third type of purpose is your social purpose, so doing good for society. Now, many organizations over the last 50 years have adopted the teachings of economists like Milton Friedman, the famous economist and academic in the States. And Milton Friedman preached that the primary purpose of an organization was to create shareholder value. And that was the main focus. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is that many organizations have done that. And what we've seen is an increasing focus on short-term results. Now, that's not the case in Japan. Now, I know from those of you joining from Japan, the great thing about Japan is that most organizations have had a very much longer term view and are much more focused on their customers than the shareholders. But particularly in the States and in the UK, it's been about shareholder returns. And what we've seen is increasing difference between the income of chief executives versus the front line. So in the UK, it's something like 150 times more than the frontline workers. You've seen short-term focus on things like stock buybacks, on providing dividends to shareholders rather than investing in R&D or investing in increasing market penetration and so on. But what we're seeing now is that increasingly organizations and consumers are saying, enough. We want to do business with brands that care about us, that put us as foremost in terms of value. But if you do that, the commercial returns will come. They take care of themselves. And if you do that in a way which is societally acceptable, you'll be allowed to continue. So to give you a great example of that, if we take Amazon. So Amazon's purpose is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. And Jeff Bezos started very much with that purpose in mind and still has it, to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. And all of the decisions, all of the initiatives that Amazon takes is how do we make it easier, faster, and better for our customers? By doing that, it's become probably the most famous brand in the world. It's become the most valuable company. And Jeff Bezos has become the wealthiest man, alongside Elon Musk, of course, at Tesla. As a result of that, Amazon has become very successful. Now, if Amazon pays taxes and if it behaves in a way which is socially acceptable, it'll be allowed to continue. So the point is, this is a cycle. You start out with your purpose, you deliver value for your customers, you become commercially successful, and then you continue by adding value for society. And we believe that this will become increasingly important in a post-COVID world. Let me give you an example of this. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. It's an MRI scanner or a CT scanner. I hope that not many of you have ever experienced one, but if you have, you'll know it's a very, very unpleasant experience. You lay on this tray, you're moved into the machine, very claustrophobic. It's very scary. You have this very, very loud noise, this magnetic vibration, which is very loud. It's hot, and you're not allowed to move, because if you move, then they don't get the right diagnostics. They don't get the right imagery. So it's a very horrible experience. Now, imagine you're a small child with cancer. Maybe you're 2 or 3 years old, and you are put on this machine and you're told that you mustn't move, otherwise the results will be invalidated and they'll have to do it all again. You can imagine that's a very distressing thing for a small child. And interestingly enough, there's been a very interesting combination between the makers of these machines, people like Westinghouse and General Electric, and Disney. Why Disney? Well, Disney's purpose for many years is about creating happiness. And when they did research into the customer journey, what they discovered was that when somebody is sent an appointment to have a scan, the fear starts already. And if it's a small child, the parents are very stressed at the thought of having to take the child along. They go into this room, it's very scary looking, and the child often has to have drugs to deal with the issue. So somebody did some research and they looked at the whole customer journey and said, how can we make the experience of this better than it is? How can we make it more successful so that they require fewer drugs and we have better success? And they teamed up with Disney. Now, Disney's purpose is creating happiness. So what they did was to create what they call the Disney Ambient experience. This was launched a few weeks ago in Amsterdam, and they're spending $100 million on creating this experience. And as you can see, it utilizes Disney imagery. It tells a story. So the child gets an invitation to visit a Disney story, and they can come along dressed as a favorite character. You can see the room is lit and decorated, a bit like a Disney themed park. They show images and videos and so on. The child can listen to Disney music. So the whole thing is themed around trying to remove the stress from the situation, and it's been very, very successful. So when you combine purpose with customer experience, it's very powerful. Let's look at the second thing. We've talked about purpose. Let's look at make it personalized. John mentioned that I'm a great fan of First Direct. Now, First Direct is a UK bank. It's a subsidiary of HSBC. And as the name implies, it was the first direct bank. So it didn't have high street branches. All of it is online or through contact centers. And First Direct has been an award-winning bank for the last 25 years. It consistently comes to the top of the surveys. And during the COVID crisis, First Direct put this on their website, which is, we're still available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. First Direct hasn't closed once since we opened, and we don't intend for the coronavirus to change that. We'd always get through to a real human, etc., without pressing button 1 or press button 2. Now, many organizations, and you may have experienced it yourself, during the COVID crisis, they were impossible to get through to. You were waiting hours and hours in contact centers on hold because they were short-staffed or because they were overwhelmed. First Direct said, we're still going to deal with this. We're still going to get through to a real person, 7 days a week. And so they really personalized it for their customers and made it much, much easier for them to get through. So the point is, it's not about having a purpose, it's about behaving on purpose. It's what you do and not just what you say. Let me turn to the third point, which is about moving at pace. This is a picture of Formula One, as many of you may know, and some of you may in fact be fans of Formula One. The pit stop is one of the fastest things of any sport in the world. And this picture shows the world record pit stop in 2019 with Max Verstappen from the Netherlands. 1.82 seconds for that pit stop. That is amazing. And the question is, how is it that these teams are able to move so quickly? How are they able to do that so quickly? And it's two things. It's collaboration, and it's about being able to pivot. So let's look at collaboration. Interestingly enough, 7 Formula One teams collaborated using their technology and research to help with coronavirus. So they called it Project Pit Lane. And 7 teams collaborated and making ventilators to help with the epidemic or for the pandemic. The second thing you need to do, and companies like GSK and Sanofi, which are competitors, in fact, are collaborating around the vaccine, just like the AstraZeneca ones and so on, and the Pfizer. But Sanofi and GSK, which are historically very, very strong competitors, are collaborating. So sometimes your competitors become your collaborators when you're dealing with a crisis. The second thing is you need to pivot and repurpose your teams. Burberry, a world global brand, as many of you will know, extremely popular in Japan, for example, very popular in Europe and the States. And Burberry's purpose is democratic luxury. So they want to be luxurious, but they want to be inclusive. They want to welcome people into the brand and not be exclusive. And one of the things that they did was to very quickly pivot to use their manufacturing capacity to manufacture masks and gowns. How are they able to do that? Well, we actually worked with Burberry some years ago. We did a big project with them, which I'll briefly cover. Some years ago, they had some problems in that they had no consistent service or sales approach across all their stores globally. They had inconsistent levels of product and service. They had an undifferentiated customer experience and poor sales performance, believe it or not. So Burberry today is very successful, but when we worked with them some years ago, they were not. They were underperforming. And we were asked to improve the sales performance. So the global director said, we want you to train our staff. And we said, well, but we don't know if that's the right solution. We don't know what the problem is. And so we recommend that we think about taking more of a strategic approach. And so they decided to establish a global customer experience program. Now, one of the frameworks we used is this one, and we use it with most of our clients. And it's very powerful, but quite simple. And I certainly recommend it to all of you as partners of Persona Global, which is, whenever you're trying to help an organization, if it's a big issue, if it's a strategic issue, then really what you need to start with is, what's the purpose of this organization? Why do they exist? What's the value they want to create for their customers? Therefore, what strategic choices do they make? So for example, if you're in the hospitality sector and you are a budget hotel, then you're making some strategic choices about being low cost. Similarly, in the aviation sector, if you're Southwest Airlines, you've made some strategic choices about being low cost, but you still need to create value for your customers. And that leads you to, what do you promise? What kind of experience do you need to create? Therefore, what kind of skills do you need? What needs to be distinctive about your products and your services, and what technology do you need? And finally, what processes do you need to deliver the experience? Now, Burberry, when they approached us, said, we'd like you to train our people, which is really about improving the skills. And we said, but we don't know if that's the issue. It may be, but what we need to do is to really understand the context, first of all. So we use the alignment framework. And the interesting thing was, what we found was, we started by using our customer experience survey. And it may well be that if you wish, John, my colleagues, Andy Milligan and Richard Graham, who are on the call today, will be able to give a presentation later on at some point around our customer experience research. But just to give you an illustration of what that looks like, we did research with Burberry and Armani and Gucci, Louis Vuitton in Japan, in the US, in Asia, in Hong Kong, Europe. And for confidentiality reasons, I won't tell you what all of the touch points were, but the numbers on the bottom show the customer journey, and each of them relates to a specific touch point. And what you can see here is, in fact, there's the variation between the different clients or different competitors, but all of them were weak in one area, around 15, 16, and 17. And what I can tell you is that those areas relate to the fitting room experience. So when you go to any of these luxury brands and you go into the fitting room, it's generally a pretty difficult experience. It's hard to get somebody's attention. You may not find the right products. You don't get much information. They tend to ignore you. It's a horrible experience. So we said there's a big opportunity around your fitting room experience to differentiate. We also looked at the customer journey and workshopped it. And briefly, what we decided with the client is they wanted to differentiate around the welcome experience. As you know, many luxury brands, whether perhaps you go to Ginza, or whether you are in Champs-Élysées, or whether you're in Fifth Avenue, wherever it might be, or whether you're in Istanbul, if you go to the luxury stores, often they're not very welcoming. You've got a security guard standing outside, glaring at you, looking like you shouldn't come into the store, that you're going to steal something. So they're not very welcoming. So Burberry said we want to be welcoming. Secondly, we want to present the product and have the customer experience it in a much nicer way. And finally, we want to have a very strong goodbye. We want our customers to have a very strong goodbye from us and keep in touch afterwards. And Burberry worked on all of those things. And that came together into the flagship stores. So if any of you come to London, go to their flagship store in Regent Street, this is what it looks like. They don't have any tills. They have the sales associates with iPads that come to you. They can serve you anywhere in the store. The fitting rooms have big plasma screens that give you the information about the product, and the sales assistants are stationed outside to give you all the support that you need. So a very different kind of experience. And then, having designed that experience, we could say, well, now we know what the employees need to be trained in. So we did research with them using the employee experience survey. And if you look at the bottom of this, you can see that the bottom 5 statements were around training not being very enjoyable or motivating. They didn't feel that the managers listened to them in terms of improving service. They didn't care about the employee experience, they didn't get recognition, and they didn't feel very valued or important. So we said, in order for this new design to work, you really need to work on these things to motivate your employees, to train them, to give them feedback, to make them feel more valued. And that led to a whole training initiative that we designed. We did research with the best performers, and we identified many different behaviors, but we packaged them into 7 modules. And we called the first module Be Professional, which was all about how they looked and how they presented themselves. The second module was about Be Perceptive, which is be much more perceptive with customers, understand what they need. Module 3 was about Be Proactive, which was about how do you offer solutions to the customer and give them advice. Be passionate, show enthusiasm and so on about the product. Persevere, so how do you deal with problems or objections? Personalize, how do you really make it a very personal kind of experience? And partnership, how do you work together with your colleagues to make sure the customer is satisfied? And over a period of weeks, each module was delivered through the store managers based on our designs. And that was very successful. This we piloted in stores in London and Tokyo, Hong Kong and Paris and Rome. And we compared against a control group. So the top line, the red line, were the pilot stores. The black line were the control group. And as you can see, the pilot stores very quickly started outperforming. And even though there was in October of that year, the market declined, all of the performance went down, but the pilot stores recovered much faster, a bit like the Brand Z research I showed you earlier. And in fact, they reported a 50% rise in profits for the year. And you can see that very nice quote about us from Angela Ahrens, who was the CEO. So they achieved what they wanted, which was the 50% rise in profits. But the way we achieved it was by, first of all, looking at the alignment. We looked at the employee experience, we looked at the customer experience, and we made sure all of those things fitted together. So with that, let me ask you this question, and I'm assuming I'll ask the question and get you just to think about it. What do you measure, those of you that are consultants, and also those of you that are clients, what do you measure most when trying to improve performance? What's the first thing you measure? And a whole range of things you can measure: brand reputation, sales performance, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, alignment, leadership effectiveness, and so on. And the answer is probably going to be, well, it depends on what we're trying to improve. If we're trying to improve employee morale, then we'll measure employee satisfaction. If we're trying to improve customer satisfaction, then we'll start there, or whatever it might be. And that's very logical. But the fact is that John mentioned earlier, research done by Harvard many years ago into the service profit chain that basically said all of these things are important and they're all linked. So actually what we need to do is to measure all of them and show that linkage. And the way we do that is through our CEM Plus customer and employee experience surveys. And I'm going to finish the presentation today by giving you a snapshot of the employee experience. And as I said, if you wish, John, we can give a later presentation about the customer survey.
Okay.
But if we look at the customer employee surveys, as John quite rightly said, they're built around the service profit chain. So if you want revenue growth and profits, then that comes from customer loyalty, which comes from customer satisfaction, which comes from external service value. Those are the items in blue. And if you want that, you need to have great employee productivity that comes from employee retention, employee satisfaction, and internal quality, the culture, which are the items in purple. So the CEM customer survey measures the blue, and the CEM employee survey measures the purple. And I'm going to focus on the employee survey. And it was built around a model I originally developed many years ago, as John knows. It was developed over a number of years. I did it based on research, literature research, and so on. I conceived the model, and then we refined it over a period of years with about 400 different organizations. So this is statistically proven. And basically the gray circle or oval are all of the internal factors that we measure, and around it are the things that we measure externally. And the lines indicate the relationship between these different factors. There are different dimensions, and the lines indicate the relationship of those dimensions. And the strength of the line, or rather the boldness of the line, indicates the strength of the relationship. So leadership is at the center. So what that's basically saying is that leadership drives all of these other things. And primarily, leadership drives quality, it drives culture, it drives standards and procedures and people policies. And those in turn drive the other things. And that's what the surveys measure. Does it work? Well, John asked Dr. David Matsumoto of the Department of Psychology from San Francisco State University some years ago to do an independent validation. And he did that. We used 23,000 responses from 52 companies in 20 countries. So a very, very large data set. And what Dr. Matsumoto concluded was that all of the correlations are statistically significant and predict the desired business results. So if you use this with your clients, you can be sure you're going to get the results that you want. Let me just give you a couple of snapshots of what it looks like. So we measure all of these different dimensions, 12 dimensions, and we ask about importance and performance. The gray is importance, the purple is performance. And you can see the different dimensions there. And just to highlight a couple of things, if you look at the first one, market focus, you can see that for this particular organization, and I've taken away the brand name, but it's one of the major banks in the world. You can see that for this particular bank, the importance of market focus was considered by the employees to be quite high, but the performance low. If you look at the second item, vision, mission, and strategy, they considered that to be less important, but performance to be very high, which seems to be a contradiction. So it seems like this company has a clear vision and strategy, but they're not very market focused. And then if you look at item 5, which is service, and item 8, quality, you can see both of those are quite low performing. So what that's showing about this organization is it was quite internally focused. One of the other graphs we look at is alignment by level. So we measure it also by manager, director, supervisor, and so on. And if you look at the item in the circle there, which is the people policies, you can see that the more senior you are in this organization, the better you think the people policies are. In other words, the more junior you are, the worse they are. So there was a real morale issue in this organization, and senior management were completely unaware of how the frontline were thinking. And we also saw that in terms of tenure. So we also measure by length of service. And if you look at the mean, you can see the longer you are in this organization, the less satisfied you are. And the trouble was with this organization, they had a lot of long-serving employees. And we also look at internal service quality. And here's just one example. So this is the vision, mission, and strategy. On the left-hand side, you can see we measure the regions, we can measure the surveyed average, so all of the average of the organizations in our data bank. And John's got many organizations in the data bank and the best organization in the data bank. So we can compare against those benchmarks. And then you can see each statement, importance and performance. And if you look at statement 7, top management clearly communicates the company purpose to employees. You can see that they consider that very important, but not that well performed. If we look at employee satisfaction, once again, this is just some snapshots because the whole report is quite comprehensive. We look at satisfaction, retention, and advocacy. How likely are employees to recommend this as a place to work? And you can see the satisfaction is much lower than the retention or the advocacy. So what does that mean? What it tells you is that a lot of people in this organization are staying there because of job security, not because they like their job. It's because they don't have perhaps another job to go to. So they're locked into this organization. And as a result, you have a lot of long-serving people who are quite demotivated. So what they needed to do is to really improve that and get some younger people and some turnover. And then we also look at items of concern, things like market focus, service quality, and so on. I won't go through all of those. And we finish up with asking the managers only about the results they're achieving. And we ask them how important those results are and the performance. And once again, if you look at question 1, meeting customer requirements, they say we're doing really well. These are the managers. We're doing really well, 6.1, but it's not important. Interestingly, if you compare it with question 4, what's important? Oh, meeting sales and growth targets, but we're not doing very well. And it comes back to the point I made earlier, which is the best organizations focus on meeting customer requirements and also their employees, and the results will take care of themselves. This particular organization was underperforming because it was very internally focused. So in conclusion, and we're just at the 45 minutes, in conclusion, if you have a strong brand and a clear purpose, and if you're focused on your customers and you have aligned people, you will thrive. You will come out of COVID-19 or your clients, and you'll be able to help your clients succeed in the future. So thanks so much indeed for your attention. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I don't know whether we have any through chat that we can spot. I mentioned that there is a paper, a guide, which talks more about the employee experience survey and alignment, which I'll send to John, and John, I'm sure will be happy to distribute it. But as I say, thank you very much indeed for your attention. As I say, also, my colleagues will be very happy to speak on another occasion about customer experience if you wish. But any questions or coming in through chat, or if you have live questions, please feel free to ask them now. And what I'll do is I'll come out of my screen here.
Yes, you can go live questions. I don't see any in chat. So please take the opportunity to go live if you want to, or if you, after this talk, after Sean's talk, you can also submit questions to us, and we will, of course, forward them to Sean. So, and you will get a response for sure. Okay. Are there any questions?
Hi, Sean. How are you?
Hi, long time no see.
Long time no see.
You didn't have a beard last time I saw you.
I know, and it wasn't white either. Okay, just a curiosity, when you show the graph in which we saw satisfaction, retention, and advocacy, for me it was very clear that satisfaction was low, retention was high. So your interpretation on the fact that these people was fighting for job security. But how would you explain it was quite high also the advocacy? And
Yeah, that's a very good question. Very good question. And the reason is that this was it's a global brand, and this particular this particular market was a difficult job market, and this was a famous international company, and therefore the employees had a sense of pride of saying they worked for this big international brand. There was a lot more status in working for this international brand than working for some local brands. So they had a sense of pride, but in fact, it wasn't a happy place to work. They, as I say, they stayed there a long time because there wasn't a lot of alternatives, but actually they weren't very motivated. So you ended up with a lot of people who were pretty demotivated, and not very productive.
Oh, thank you.
Good question. Any other questions? What other questions do you have?
Anyone else? So I want to thank you, Sean. If you have questions in Europe, you can submit them to Sonsoles and in Madrid, and she will collect them. For those people outside of Europe, you can submit them to myself, and I will see that Sean gets those questions.
Okay. Just to say, by the way, I know we've got people from all over the world, and we've done this kind of research, for example, with Tofaş in Turkey, which is the leading Fiat retailer in Turkey. We've done it with Disney in Japan. We've done it with PayPal in the States. So a wide variety of organizations have taken this approach, and so we can, I think you'll find it interesting, and as I say, we'll be very happy to make the card available. But thanks so much indeed for sharing your day with me. I hope you found it of value.
Yes, I hope everyone found it valuable. Thanks for tuning in. And
John, how are you? I have a quick question, if possible.
You have a question?
Sisham, how are you?
Good. Have the question. Please come with the question.
Can we have a couple of case studies? If you have case studies for applications of the survey, you have shown us a couple of them in the presentations, but we just need to read them to get deeper on it, to understand it, share it with our teams, and share it with our customers as well. So do you have any success stories, written case studies, success stories, telling the customer where was the customer before the survey, what happened after the survey, impact analysis, anything that helps you to understand and to sell?
Yeah, well, we've got some certainly some case studies on our website, but our most recent book, On Purpose, actually has the case study. Sorry, our previous book, Bold, has a whole case study on Burberry, which talks in detail about the Burberry example. But our last book, On Purpose, also has a number of case studies which shows the results, the research that we did and what was done and the outcome. So you may find that will give you more detail.
Let me just add one other thing, that there are several cases where companies have rerun the survey after a period of time, and we can compare. We have comparative reports, so you can see exactly what's happened and if there's a need for further intervention, because the intervention takes place by our partners. And so one of the things is we look at how to analyze the survey and how to write an executive briefing so that you can present it. And there are a number of cases where the survey has been repeated by clients about every 18 months or so.
In fact, just on that point, John, we are currently working with TIAA, which is one of the largest pension providers in the United States. It's one of the largest financial services companies, $1 trillion company. And we worked with TIAA on their purpose and their customer experience about 18 months ago, and then one of our subsidiaries, Nuveen. And my colleague Richard has, we've just, Audio Toyama, as you know, we've just rerun that survey 18 months later, so they could see the results before and after and tune their strategy going forward. So oftentimes organizations, just as you say, John, will use these surveys as a pulse check, as an input to their strategic planning.
Another question.
Now, one of the other things sorry, and I'll come back to you, is that one of the objections that many clients have is they say, oh, well, we've got an employee survey. And of course, most organizations do have employee surveys. The fact is, though, that most employee surveys focus on HR issues. So they're about pay and conditions and communications. The alignment survey, as you saw earlier, actually takes a much more strategic view, and it looks at all of the facets that create success in an organization. So even if a client has an employee survey, and they may want to do that every single year or every few months, we say if you're doing a big change like Burberry did, it's actually useful to use our employee survey, our alignment survey, because it, as a consultant or as a client, it gives you a much better understanding of what the issues are. So you're going to say
more comprehensive.
I've got another question. Burberry is a retail company, and the other pension is I can say B2C company. From your experience, is there special sectors where the product, the survey best fits, or you have success stories across the borders of B2B customers? Where to shoot? That's my sales question, where to shoot?
Yeah, good question. I think any organization can benefit from taking much more of a strategic approach, but certainly where you have a lot of people, so in hospitality or retail or banking or airlines, where you have a lot of people in different locations, that becomes even more important for alignment, because it's very difficult to have a common understanding and a common approach and consistency with customers. If you've got hundreds of branches or hundreds of shops or many airports or many hotels. So if you're a brand that is differentiated on the basis of customer experience, and you're operating across countries in many locations, it's particularly important. If you're perhaps a technology company where you're manufacturing something in one location, less important.
So that's an interesting point, because we have the capacity to do this survey in multiple languages. We have the capacity to analyze it. One of the key points about these surveys is that they're au jour, they're to the day. There's not a long time between when the customer orders the survey until the results are achieved. And the results that come out and the reports come out are proactive. They actually draw from databases. They tell you things you can do now, the low-hanging fruits. Our partners then write the strategic approach, what the company really needs to do. And so I want to stress that Sean's quite right. If you have a company with a large number of locations, great number of locations, these can be handled all at once. One of the largest surveys we did was for the Shangri-La hotel chain, and that was 33 properties. I think it was like 18,000 people, 8 languages, and we produced the survey in 5 days, the results of the survey. So,
John, can I ask you a question? Very short question.
Yes, who's talking?
Artur from Portugal.
Artur.
Hello. Yeah. Sean, do you have or do you think it's possible to apply organizational alignment process to the public sector or to a big organization in the public sector trying to making some efforts of change management?
Yeah, that's a good question, Arthur. In fact, yes, you can. John Dawkins, one of the Persona Global Partners in Australia, has done so. So he's worked with the public sector, particularly, I think, academic and schools in Australia. It's also been used with, I think, health services. So yes, you can. And once again, it's particularly powerful, I think, when used with public sector, because in many public sector organizations, people don't have a strong sense of purpose. They're a little bit more bureaucratic. They work for the government. They don't really know why they work and what that means for customers. So actually public sector organizations can benefit hugely by creating a much better sense of purpose. And interesting enough, as I said earlier, what we're seeing with COVID is, once again, the public sector, particularly health services, are seeing themselves as needing to be much more agile, much more customer focused, operating and behaving in some very different ways. And that requires them to be much more aligned.
John, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Claudio Rodman.
Yes, Claudio.
I want to ask, how does the political climate in a country affect the results of the survey? Because after the COVID situation, things have changed a lot. So how does it affect the results?
It's an interesting question. I don't think it would change it affected much. And the reason being that the statements that we ask are very specific statements, and they are generally behavioral statements. So they're not about perceptions or attitudes, they're very much more behavioral. And so people, I think, answer them based on their reactions to how they are treated, how they're trained, how much they know about their customers, how much, their relationships with their managers and so on. And so whilst there may be some influence from what's happening around them in the world, I don't believe it will be materially affected. Some things may change in terms of the importance level. So for example, where we talk about how important is it for you to understand your organization's purpose, things like that may be affected. People may say, well, yes, actually, it's really important that we understand that, or it's really important that we are serving our customers in an agile way. So the importance may be reflected, but I think not the performance. That's more an indication of how they feel about what's actually happening. And that's the reason we ask importance and performance, because most HR type surveys, employee surveys, don't ask about importance, but we do, because that is something that changes.
John, may I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Sean. Very interesting, the survey that you presented, but let me share with you that the post-COVID is e-commerce. So many companies are selling through the internet. So the customer experience has changed radically. Mm-hmm. So it's not about the employee, because you have a chatbot or artificial intelligence dealing with the customer more than a person. So have you updated that technology part in terms of the new way of buying and things? That's number one. And number two, as consultants, do you have any other effort to have a better customer experience in addition of training?
Yes. So let me answer your first question. The first thing is that there is a difference between customer experience and customer service. So customer experience is everything that happens to the customer, all of the touch points, including e-commerce, including the contact center, including the web. All of these things are touch points and shape the experience. Customer service is generally considered to be what happens between frontline people and customers, and customer service is a part of customer experience. So the point I'm making here is that when we talk about customer experience, we are talking about the end-to-end experience, the journey. And you're quite right in saying that post-COVID or through COVID, online retailing, for example, has become much more important. And therefore, things like technology and processes have become much more important. But what we know is that technology, in the absence of understanding the strategic, the customer experience, often fail. Many organizations, Forrester did a piece of research that found that 80% of CRM implementations and technology implementations failed to achieve their objectives if they were simply bought in as technology. You've got to think about the experience. And yes, the survey reflects that, because there are statements about technology, there are statements about the tools that the frontline people have to deal with. And so, yes, it does reflect that. Secondly, your second question is, our consultancy really, and by the way, we're a leading consultancy. We won the Financial Times UK Leading Consultancies of the Year 2 years running now. So, we're very well established internationally. But we specialize in three things. The first is about purpose. So what do you stand for? What's your brand? And helping organizations really define their brand. The second is around customer experience, how they stand out. And the third is around how they stand firm, which is the employee experience. So those are the three things we work on: brand, customer experience, and employee experience.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there other questions for Sean? Okay. Well, if not, I'll thank everybody for coming. I hope you found benefit. In fact, I'm sure you did find benefit. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next conference. Again, if you have any questions, for Sean or for us, please send them to us, and we will be happy to forward them and see what kind of specific answers you can get. So Sean, thanks a lot. Great. Okay, and we'll be following up.
Okay, bye everybody.
Okay.